Hi, welcome to Deep In. My name doesn't matter. Let's dive in. So today we want to talk about Mary Slessor, or the Queen of the Calabar Mission. She lived from 1848 to 1915. She was born in poverty in Scotland, lived in a one-bedroom house with no plumbing, no electricity, no water, one-bedroom apartment, really a one-bedroom apartment. Her father was an alcoholic who would frequently come home at night and kick her out, so she had to stay on the street. She started working when she was 11 years old, becoming the primary breadwinner for her family at age 14, and offering service to her parents as a breadwinner from 14 to her early 20s, and her mom and sister in particular, providing for them. So as a child, she had a neighbor who went to a Presbyterian church who came and got her and took her to church and talked to her about Jesus and talked to her about the gospel and talked to her about salvation, and she became a very strong Christian during that time period. Now, in her early 20s, she went to do mission work in the slums of Dundee, Scotland, and after a few years of serving there, she was inspired by the missionary Livingstone's story, and she in Africa, the doctor who went to Africa and gave his life for missions in Africa, and she decided she was going to go to Africa, so she joins Calabar Missions and travels to Nigeria, Africa. And in Nigeria, she learns the language and becomes a missionary there and serves there. And in her first term there, she kept pressing the people around her to go deeper inland. But because slavery was still fresh on the mind of Nigeria Africans, and there was still some trepidation with allowing Europeans to come inland, the majority of missions was done on the coast where the missionary compounds were and in the safety and security of the compound. So everybody wanted to kind of stay back and not go inland, but Mary Slessor, decided that she wanted to go inland. She started to kind of press inward and press into the country a little further inward. And she was moderately successful. She learned the language and started some gospel evangelism in several villages, and had a very difficult time leaving the security of the compound to go inland. But she kind of would take these trips inland, and she contracted malaria, which Europeans are wont to do in Africa, and she contracted malaria, and so she had to go home to Scotland to recover. So she recovers and then immediately turns around and goes back to Africa, back to Nigeria, and after returning, she abandons her European customs. This time she goes all out. She decides, I'm not going to stay near the compound, I'm going to go all out. And she goes into the African continent, pressing inland into the deeper regions where the evangelism of the gospel had not taken place, and she goes in and begins to live like the Nigerians. She lives in a mud hut. She goes among the villages. She dresses in Nigerian clothing. She eats Nigerian food. She abandons her European ways, and she begins to teach the gospel. Now, while she's there, she starts to educate the people around them, teaching them to write and read and do math and just basic education to children in all these villages. She begins to evangelize openly in villages. She adopts children, several children that have been abandoned by their family. She adopts them. For whatever reason they were abandoned, she adopts these children and takes care of them and raises them as her own. She openly opposes witchcraft, and there's tons of stories about Mary Slessor just openly opposing the medicine men and the witchcraft of the people in the tribes of Nigeria. And so she again, she finds great success and great gospel success in finding people's lives are being changed and villages are turning to the Lord. And she contracts malaria again, or she gets sick again. This time, I think it was malaria, but a lot of scholars are they don't know what it was. She gets sick again and has to return to Scotland again to recover from her illnesses. Now, her third return after her illnesses, she comes back to Africa and she begins to press in again like she was doing. Now this time her mom and sister die. So her mom and sister back in Scotland both die. She gets word that they pass, and she mourns for a time, but she is so excited because now she feels free to do the mission work. There is nothing on earth holding her back, so she charges into the mission field and begins to press deeper and deeper, even into the jungle regions of Nigeria, and she presses deeply in, and for 25 years she lives among the Africans in a mud hut, facing hardship and difficulty at every turn. She deals with disease and with rebellion from the people fighting against her. She deals with literal boils break out on her face at one point, and all this is recorded, and she's got an incredible story. For 25 years, she lives in a mud hut with 7 adopted children, enduring terrible conditions, teaching the gospel, educating children and women. This is important, educating children and women who weren't often educated in Nigeria and were treated more like property. She stood up for the rights of women. Was opposed to the brutal practices that many Nigerian tribes had, one of which was the idea that the husband of the family could kill the wife at any moment, or kill the woman at any moment, because he probably had more than one, but he could kill her at any moment just because he wanted to. And she stood against that. She stood against the medicine men and the witch doctors that were all around doing demonic practices, and she moves further and further into the remote reaches of Africa to teach the gospel. Now, after 40 years of living in huts and serving the African people in Nigeria, in particular, she is called by the natives the mother of all peoples, because she was so kind and tenderhearted, adopting children left and right. And we don't know how many she adopted, how many she kind of raised on her own, but she would take care of these children and make them her own. And she certainly acted like the Africans were her family for 40 years of ministry. She dies in her hut, and she leaves her adopted children to do the rest of the mission work as they're grown by this point. So there's some lessons we can learn from Mary Slessor. One is that the biggest one that we can learn is that when you face hardships in life and when you face difficulties in life, those difficulties are often preparing you for something God is going to do in you and through you in the future. Mary Slessor had this incredibly difficult childhood where her father would kick her out to live on the street, and she was in a 1-bedroom house with no running water, no plumbing, no lights, no electricity, and she moves to Africa and moves into a mud hut. Not much different. In fact, sometimes in a way a little better than the stone apartment that was 1 bedroom and one room, not 1 bedroom, 1 room and no running anything or light or anything. She also understood what it was for a woman to be mistreated and abused because her father was abusive alcoholic, and she knew what that was like. She knew that that was not the gospel. She knew that that's not the way it's supposed to be. So when she got to Nigeria and began to teach the gospel and saw men behaving this way, she knew that that all needed to change. So we learn from Mary Slessor that sometimes the difficulties we face early in life often are put there so that we would be able to share the gospel in a powerful and meaningful way in the future. The second thing that we can learn from Mary Slessor is the greatest joy in life is service to the kingdom of God. And so Mary Slessor had a joyful demeanor, joyful life. She was a strong and hard woman, but she was a joyful woman, a woman filled with the joy of Christ. And everyone saw it, and everyone knew it, and everyone could tell, because service to the King of Glory in eternal service is the greatest joy that anyone could ever have. So when you are called upon to surrender your life in service to Christ, whether it's in a small way, like attending a church and being faithful to take care of your family, or in a massive way, like traveling across the globe to share the gospel, whichever way it is, do it, because that is where you will find supreme joy. So thank you for joining me to Deep End. Take time to breathe today. Now go get to work.